DevOps is the logical consequence of the Agile revolution. DevOps is the alignment of two groups historically at odds, development and operations, one with the goal of making rapid changes, the other with the goal of keeping the system stable. DevOps is the simultaneous achievement of speed and stability through techniques such as automation. DevOps is a hybrid role and skill set spun out of closer collaboration between admins and programmers. DevOps is a community advocating a cultural shift towards continuous delivery. DevOps is the truth. DevOps is. I'm Ray Myers. Welcome to Craft versus Cruft. I am DevOps and so can you. So I've been off for a little bit of a break. It's now sweater weather in Chicago. Welcome back, and in the meantime there's been some more content for you to check out as well. You can check the links in the description. I've recently done a presentation for Elastic, the makers of Elasticsearch, on a zombie technology elimination project, which is a technique of using gamification to fight technical debt. And I've also got a webinar with Elevate Agility that I did with Nicole Safely on the ways you can adapt your business to this rapidly changing, crazy world we got going on here. But today I'm gonna quickly cover something I get asked fairly often, which is how can you get into DevOps? As you can see, there's a lot of things that DevOps may mean, but one thing everyone seems to agree is that it is red hot on the market right now. And there's certainly a shortage of experienced DevOps talent. It's kind of unclear how you get there. So if you think this area might be for you, I'll give you my thoughts on that, as well as what my path looked like getting there. What is a DevOps engineer? That alone is somewhat nebulous. This is how I generally think of it. DevOps engineers are software professionals who are T-shaped, creative, fast learning, and highly collaborative, usually experts in automation. By T-shaped, I mean you have at least one area of deep expertise, but you also have a large area where you know enough to get your hands dirty. So you might have some exposure across domains like software engineer, release engineer, systems admin, database admin, web admin, network admin, and you might be an expert in one of those things. Now, if your topology is such that you have a team of DevOps engineers, you might want their expertise to be kind of spread across these areas, but typically it's not a different job title where your home base is. That's more akin to, among programmers, knowing a whole lot about one framework or another. It's still the same basic job role. There are also some related titles, such as platform engineer and site reliability engineer, which is my current title track. But exactly how these roles get implemented is going to vary more from company to company than you'd think of it varying in between the job title. These are more connotations, though SRE is one that has at least an official definition because it's a term Google invented, and they've got a book that defines how they consider site reliability engineering to be done, which I highly recommend. Very insightful. Out the gate, something to understand is if you're new to the industry, there's almost no such thing as a junior DevOps role. There's usually not a role you can enter the software industry in. You are usually working up to it either as a developer or from the perspective of one of many kinds of admins. You establish some level of seniority there, and then you can broaden. I don't know if that's intrinsic, if it will always be that way, but right now the amount of different skill sets that are required in DevOps tends to mean there's really no coherent track for starting there, in my opinion. So we've talked about what's the general quality of these DevOps engineers. What do they do? That depends a lot on the topology that you implement DevOps with in your organization. And I'm linking to a resource on DevOps team Topologies that talks a lot about the different options, their different contexts and pitfalls. The topology that closest matches what my team at Morningstar does is a DevOps advocacy group, where we're kind of like free-floating consultants. So we have our own working group, but then we'll detach and join other teams and help them implement these things. So how did I end up in this track? Well, basically by finding vacuums. I started out as a back-end Java engineer at Carfax in Columbia, Missouri, and I found that certain things get neglected. For instance, the build process. You might have these frequent build errors or long-running builds, testing difficulties and so forth. No one really wants to deal with it, so I was one of the people who would, and I learned about it. I became pretty good at build automation and got into continuous integration. We introduced what's now called Jenkins when it was called Hudson, and saw a lot of benefits there, other kinds of automation, just by recognizing where there were unfilled needs. Towards the end of my tenure at Carfax, I was also involved in a large initiative to migrate the data center into a private cloud model. And I got to work a lot closer with operations than I had before. Found I really enjoyed working on those holistic problems. Our roles were still separated. You were either ops or you were dev. The person who wrote the code couldn't actually run the code. But for the first time in the company's history, we were actually on the same direct team. Another thing I did at Carfax was worked on a lot of internal apps to address other kinds of problems I'd see day to day. And something that helped a lot with that is they had a professional development program where every Friday afternoon was time that you could sort of allocate to things kind of freely, whether you wanted to learn or just work on something that would make your days better. Happy to say a lot of things I came up with during those periods are still running today and used by many teams in the company. So then about 6 years ago, I moved to Chicago and I worked at a small education tech startup called GetSet, hovering around 3 and 4 developers, so very different environment. When I joined, we were transitioning from Heroku to plain AWS, and kind of a similar situation where I noticed some gaps weren't being filled. We didn't have a deploy process we were happy with. We didn't have a lot of strategy to manage these servers we were creating. So I gradually gravitated into the role of managing the AWS infrastructure there, and because it was just a small part of my overall job, still doing development, in some cases managing developers as well, I had to be very rigorous with automation and make sure this wouldn't require a lot of my time. So I used Jenkins there and Ansible, rebuilt the infrastructure a couple times over, initially with plain Linux EC2 instances, and then later Dockerized in the orchestrator ECS. Was there almost 5 years, and when it was time to move on, I decided that a full-time DevOps role would be something really interesting to pursue, because I really enjoyed that part of my job. Automation, the holistic understanding of the system, and being able to focus on improving pain points, which is a really big thing in DevOps. Which brings me to my current role as a lead site reliability engineer at Morningstar. So what do we get from this? Ultimately, if you're looking into crossing over to these areas, or really any kind of area within technology, if you work at a very small company, like a startup, you're going to have a lot more opportunities to wear a lot of different hats. It's sort of the blessing and the curse. That's certainly an option if you feel like you're looking to get your feet wet and don't really have the qualifications yet to do it full time. You're going to tend to see a lot less specialized roles the smaller the company, and a lot more opportunities to just sort of move into these other areas as the need arises. But wherever you are, you will see gaps, and just look for those opportunities where you can take initiative and everyone will be happy about it because it's work they were, avoiding. Now, if you're looking to get into this area, there are some books I consider to be essential reading. Those are Continuous Delivery, the Google SRE book, and either Phoenix Project or the Unicorn Project, if not both. Notice none of those are about specific technologies. This is about organizational patterns, about general approaches to problem solving. These are about common pitfalls that come up, philosophies. If you call yourself a DevOps engineer, I don't just expect that you know Bash and Docker. I expect you to be an advocate of something. I expect you to have a deep understanding of where dysfunction occurs and pain points and how to go about addressing them. Another really interesting book is Accelerate by Nicole Forsgren, Gene Kim, and Jez Humble, who are three of the most important thinkers in DevOps. The only reason it's not on the essential reading list I gave earlier is that it tends to be just a scientific validation of a lot of the things that were said earlier in those other books. So if you're really interested to know, like, what does the research say, or if you're looking at messaging that would resonate really well with leadership, Accelerate is a great summary of what we really know to this day. So basically that's the story. Anyone will tell you, learn Bash, learn Jenkins, learn Docker, learn infrastructure as code. But I wanted to give you a feel for what do I think this journey is really about. There's also a great podcast link, again, in the description that goes into a lot more of the nuts and bolts about how to break into this kind of career path. And so best of luck. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at LambdaPocalypse or on LinkedIn if you're curious about some more specific advice. And do subscribe to the YouTube here if you'd like to see more. It lets me know that people are interested. Always remember what Lao Tzu said in the Tao Te Ching, with patience, the most tangled cord may be undone. Thank you.